When some problem, however real or imaginary, arose, the government would create an agency or take an existing agency and give it more power and say, okay, solve the problem.
The purview of expert administration grew bit by bit. It all started with Woodrow Wilson's supposedly modest effort to offload the minute details of government administration from Congress to disinterested and efficient experts, until FDR's New Deal. Now, a public that had endured a Great Depression and a Second World War was growing accustomed to centralized federal power. 6 years of war dramatically transformed the U.S. economy and many of its cities. This brought waves of migration into cities, and that, unsurprisingly, brought its own housing challenges. So how does the federal government solve a problem like housing? Simple. By throwing money and expertise at it. President Truman took a page from FDR's book and unveiled a Fair Deal agenda, which included the Housing Act of 1949. The FHA poured money into urban renewal and slum clearance projects. The government's experts believed that slums could be replaced with highly efficient, self-sustaining public housing.
The beginning of the Great Society was urban renewal, building tall towers to house people. On the principle, we knew how to house people.
Perhaps no project was more ambitious than St. Louis's Pruitt-Igoe complex. A massive stretch of downtown was completely razed to make room for it. Entire neighborhoods erased. Up-and-coming architect Minoru Yamasaki was selected to design the buildings. Yamasaki was highly influenced by a French architect named Corbusier. Corbusier was a huge fan of Frederick Winslow Taylor, and Taylor's principles of efficiency imbued his work. Yamasaki wanted to try something similar for Pruitt-Igoe. Architecture magazines raved about his initial designs. Skip-stop elevators stopped on every third floor. The idea was both to maximize the number of units and to foster a sense of community by encouraging interaction between neighbors. And although he preferred a mix of building sizes rather than strictly high-rises, St. Louis officials said no.
He had to work for government, and government said, well, this is too expensive. You have to make this housing more dense.
Reluctantly, Yamasaki did it their way, and up the towers went.
33 towers, 11 stories each. And the premise was, people live in slums, let's move them into something nice. An animal farm in the city, right? Pruitt-Igoe. These towers are clean. They have all sorts of amenities that the homes these people live in don't have. They're going to be happier, and progress will ensue.
So we'll take these people, raise all these private homes, create the modern towers. Just the fact that they're in this modern, gleaming place is going to engender feelings in the residents that are going to lead to utopia. Well, what happens was the exact opposite.
It's hard to find the right word for what happened next. Tragedy? Disaster? St. Louis officials assumed the city's population would keep growing. It did not. The same FHA money that allowed for the construction of the complex also subsidized suburban home ownership. Whites left the city in droves, making the complex de facto segregated. There weren't enough people willing to live in the towers, which again were designed to have maximum occupancy so that the collected rent would cover upkeep. Many of the residents received government benefits, so they paid a much lower rate. Under Missouri law, welfare benefits came with a brutal requirement. A family could only have one parent, the mother. The government was paying mothers to kick fathers out of their homes, disproportionately wrecking black families. Upkeep quickly unraveled as there wasn't enough money generated to pay for it. But Yamasaki's designs bear some blame as well.
Because people couldn't get off on their floor through the elevator, they had to go on the stairs, and muggers came and mugged them there. No one wants to go up and down stairs because that's where the muggers go. It was true. And Pruitt-Igoe became very dangerous.
Light fixtures in the breezeways were constantly being smashed, leaving nightmarishly dark halls where the worst of things could and did happen.
This glorious national symbol of a public housing project, instead of becoming heaven, became hell and was eventually dynamited in a very sad and dramatic session. So instead of building the future American home, we put people in prisons. That's what Pruitt-Igoe was. It was universally hated by a proud city, St. Louis. It's still a scar on the cityscape.
The people had no voice in it. Science, as interpreted by the politicians in the 20th century, took on a kind of an arrogant edge to it. And of course, that meant the rule of the experts, the rule of the scientists. We don't know enough. We know a lot, but we don't know enough.
Nobody took the failure more to heart than the architect, Yamasaki. He expressed regret for his deplorable mistakes with Pruitt-Igoe. By the 1950s, he was giving bitter speeches about the tragedy of housing thousands in exactly look-alike cells, which certainly does not foster our ideals of human dignity and individualism. To the Detroit Free Press, he put it more simply: social ills can't be cured by nice buildings. The final towers were demolished on spectacular display in 1976. With them should have gone the hubris of centrally planned government, but alas, what did government do instead? We launched the Great Society, the next New Deal.